high IQ individuals, it is their absolute right to rule. In other words, the oligarchs of today are our modern day
He's got some
kings.
nerve, bro.
And Mr. President, it is not just power that they want.
No, you want power
Despite the incredible wealth
and control
that they currently have, they want more and more and more. Their greed has no end. Today, Mr. Musk is worth $402 billion. Mr. Zuckerberg is worth $252 billion, and Mr. Bezos is worth $249 billion. With combined wealth of $903 billion, these three people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 170 million Americans. And not surprisingly, since Trump was elected, their wealth has soared. Musk has become $138 billion richer. Zuckerberg has become $49 billion richer. And Bezos has become $28 billion richer since Election Day in November. Meanwhile, Mr. President, while the very rich become much richer, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 85 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured in terms of health care. 25% of our seniors in this country are trying to survive on $15,000 a year or less. 800,000 Americans are homeless, and we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. And real inflation-adjusted wages for the average American worker has not gone up in 50 years. Does anyone really think that the oligarchs give a damn about ordinary? Trust me, they don't. Musk's decision to dismember USAID means that tens of thousands of the poorest people in this world will either go hungry or die of preventable diseases. Tens of thousands of people. But it's not just USAID and what's happening abroad. Here in the United States, mark my words, if we do not stop them, they will soon be going after the healthcare, nutrition, housing, and educational programs that protect the most vulnerable people in our country, all so that they can raise the money they need to provide huge tax breaks for themselves and for other billionaires. As modern-day kings who believe they have the absolute right to rule, they will sacrifice without hesitation the well-being of working people in order to protect their power and their privileges. Further, they will use the enormous media operations they own to deflect attention away from the impact of their policies while they entertain us to death. Mr. Musk owns Twitter. Mr. Zuckerberg owns Meta, which includes Facebook and Instagram. And Mr. Bezos owns the Washington Post and Twitch. Further, they and their fellow oligarchs will continue within our corrupt campaign finance system to spend huge amounts of money to buy politicians in both major political parties. Bottom line, the oligarchs, with their unlimited amounts of money, are waging a war on the working class of our country, and it is a war that they are intent on winning. Now, I'm not going to kid anybody. The problems that our country faces right now are enormously serious, and they are not easy to solve. Our economy is rigged. The rich get richer, poor get poorer, and the middle class struggles. Our campaign finance system is totally corrupt. Billionaires can now pour as much money as they want into both political parties. And climate change is ravaging our country and the world with unprecedented levels of extreme weather disturbances, among many other crises our country faces. But, Mr. President, in the midst of all of these crises, this is what I do know, and this is what I do believe. And that is that the worst fear of the ruling class of our country is that the American people, whether they are black or white or Latino, whether they are urban or rural, whether they are young or old, gay or straight, whatever. The fear of the ruling class is that the American people come together to demand a government that represents all of us, not just the people on top. The oligarch's nightmare is that we will not allow ourselves to be divided up by race, religion, sexual orientation, or country of origin, and will come together and have the courage to take them on. Will this struggle be easy? No, it will not. And one of the reasons that it will not be easy is that the ruling class of this country will constantly remind us that they have the power. They control the government. They own the media. But our job right now in these difficult times is to go back and remember the great struggles and sacrifices that millions of Americans have waged over the centuries in difficult times to create a more democratic, just, and humane society. Think about all of the sacrifices and the struggles that Americans went through to create a more democratic, just, and humane society. And think about trying to put yourself to where they were in those times of crisis. Think about what was being said at those times. Think about the 1770s. Overthrowing the King of England, the most powerful person on earth, the British Empire, to create a new nation and have self-rule here in the colonies? Impossible. So many people thought it could not be done. Establishing universal suffrage, the right of all people, whether they were wealthy or not, to vote. Imagine that, what a radical idea, extending the right to vote to poor people. Impossible, couldn't be done, but it was done. Ending slavery and segregation, taking on all of the power of the slaveholders. Impossible, but it was done. Granting workers the right to form unions and ending child labor, taking on the power of big business. Impossible, but it was done. Giving women control over their own bodies, taking on sexism, taking on the powers that be. Couldn't be done, impossible, but it was done. Passing legislation to establish Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, a minimum wage, clean air and water standards. Impossible, it couldn't be done, but it was done. In other words, Mr. President, I think back to what Nelson Mandela told us. And he said, everything is impossible until it is done. So in these difficult days, when we find ourselves arrayed against the wealthiest people in the world, the most powerful people in the world, people who want to expand the power of the oligarchy, people who want to move us toward authoritarianism, I know that people get discouraged, that we can't take them on, that we cannot create a government that works for all and not just the few, that we cannot do what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care to all people as a human right, that we cannot raise the minimum wage to a living wage so that tens of millions of people do not earn starvation wages, that we cannot make sure that all of our kids get the quality education that they deserve, that we can't expand Social Security to lower the poverty rate among seniors. And I know that in this moment people say, well, that's an impossible dream, can't be done. But I think if you look back on American history, you will find that in very difficult and dark days, when people came together, they did the impossible. So this ain't going to be easy. We're taking on enormously powerful people who really do not believe in democracy or the rule of law. But if we stand together, we're going to win this fight. And not only will we save American democracy, we're going to create the kind of nation that I think most of us know we should become. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Thank you.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, trust is at the very center of our national security. The trust that we share with allies and partners around the world. The trust that the American people have in us and in our armed services and in our intelligence services. The trust that vital allies have that causes them to share with us information about threats, challenges, opportunities. That's the very foundation of our national security. And today I rise to warn my colleagues about the risks to our national security posed by the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard to be the Director of National Intelligence. As the ranking member of the Senate Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, I have a significant involvement in our nation's intelligence apparatus. And over the course of the confirmation hearings and the debate here on the floor about former Congresswoman Gabbard, I've concluded that she has an alarming record, revealed more fully in her confirmation hearings, but also in a review of her speeches, her travels, her positions. As a Democrat, as a Congresswoman, as a candidate for president, as a supporter of President Trump. She has gone quite a distance. She has defended Edward Snowden. Snowden is widely viewed by folks in our intelligence community, our national security apparatus, our armed forces, and many here as a traitor who betrayed some of the most important secrets that are critical to keeping the United States secure. She would not, in her confirmation hearings, answer the question, is Edward Snowden a traitor? Gabbard bemoaned the rise of HTS in Syria, which recently overthrew the brutal dictator Bashar al-Assad, without mentioning the fall of Assad. She talked about how tragic it was that HTS overran Damascus, without mentioning the side benefit of the fall of a brutal dictator. And in her confirmation hearings, repeatedly dodged pointed and relevant questions about FISA and Section 702, key tools for our intelligence community. All of this is in keeping with a long-standing record as an apologist for authoritarians and even enemies of the United States. She has repeatedly blamed the United States and NATO for Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And I will tell you, as someone who is about to go to the Munich Security Conference this weekend with a broad and bipartisan delegation from this body and from the House, I will never forget being at the Munich Security Conference just before Russia invaded Ukraine, broad spectrum. They'd been in eastern Ukraine at that point for years. They had occupied Crimea and then launched a war into the Donetsk, the Donbass, the eastern part of Ukraine. But it was just days after the Munich Security Conference in February of 2022 that tens of thousands of Russian troops, whole divisions, poured over the line in a broad spectrum invasion that included brutality against civilians, bombardment of the entire nation, ultimately cruel acts of violence against women and children, fully documented in the press and courts around the world. And yet Ms. Gabbard blamed the United States and NATO for provoking this invasion by Russia of a sovereign nation, a nation where the United States, in writing, guaranteed its territorial sovereignty in the 1994 agreement that led to them giving up their nuclear weapons. Ms. Gabbard visited Syria and met with Bashar al-Assad for several days in 2017 and relied on pro-Assad sources to cast doubt on accounts of his use of chemical weapons against his own people. She has a long history of repeating pro-Kremlin talking points and has become a favorite on Russian state media. She appears frequently because she frequently is attacking the United States in Russian state media. President, this body will all too soon take up the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard. We should not proceed. We should not vote for her. Our nation faces massive threats that are growing day by day. Our nation is facing threats around the world, from North Korea and Iran, from China and from Russia. And we need an intelligence service equipped to respond to these challenges. Can we trust Tulsi Gabbard to lead our intelligence services and to respond to these threats? I cannot, we cannot, and we should not. This body should not vote to confirm Tulsi Gabbard as the next Director of National Intelligence. Thank you.
No, she ain't never changed that, Mommy. I don't think so. Yes, I know, and I don't know how to.
Mr. President, do you remember where you were on September 11th? Most Americans do. I do. It was right outside that door. I was in a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning, and as we had the meeting, we looked down the mall. We were watching a little television set, and we saw these planes flying into skyscrapers in New York. nobody could quite understand what was going on. First, we thought it was an accident, as most people probably felt the same way. But then when the second plane hit, we knew there was more. Then there came a moment when somebody said, "Look down the mall." We looked down the mall and saw black smoke billowing across the mall here in Washington from the Pentagon, because a plane had crashed into the Pentagon. And there was this moment where people didn't know which way to turn, where to get answers, what was going on. And someone came racing into the room and said, "Evacuate the Capitol building. Another plane is coming directed toward this building." We all raced out down the steps and stood on the lawn outside, didn't know which way to turn, had no idea what was going on. Tourists were coming up to me because I had a suit and tie on and said, "Where are we supposed to go?" Well, I told them where the metro stations were and pointed in several directions. It's a day you won't forget. Most of us, I'm sure, felt at that point we had to figure out what happened first and to stop it from ever happening again. So where did we turn? First, we turned to law enforcement for obvious reasons. That's who you call, 911. See if they can give you any information, give you any advice, and keep you safe. But also, in this town, you think, we hope our intelligence agencies, the ones that collect information, know who those people were so we can stop them from ever doing this again. Those intelligence agencies were critical, not just for the security of this country, but the survival of this country. In the wake of September 11th, the most historic terrorist attack in our nation's history, we learned the hard way that agencies within the intelligence community need to be good, effective, and coordinate what they're doing. And so we embarked on several projects, and one that I was a small part of, in rewriting the laws, creating intelligence agencies, and making sure that each of our intelligence agencies, as good as they are, speak to one another. It seems so obvious. They need to coordinate, but they had what they called smokestacks, where they kept their information to themselves and didn't share it with other agencies. Well, that changed, and we changed the whole attitude towards intelligence and coordinating information. We created the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It oversees 18 different intelligence agencies that span the CIA, Defense Department, State Department, Energy Department, and others. It is now essential to modern safety in America. But yet the president, Donald Trump, has selected a person to run this critical agency coordinating 18 different intelligence agencies who has little or no experience leading this critical American security apparatus. Her name is Tulsi Gabbard. During President Trump's first term, he made clear of his fondness for certain leaders in the world who were controversial, such as Viktor Orban of Hungary, Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. So he ends up picking a person to run intelligence network who shares a similarly terrible judgment on critical leaders. Tulsi Gabbard, former congresswoman, is infamous for spending time with despots and autocratic leaders in the world, including Vladimir Putin of Russia and Bashar al-Assad of Syria, and traitors to the United States like Edward Snowden. Her fondness for these oppressive, anti-democratic regimes does not go unreciprocated. They know her, they like her, and they say quite a few things about her. Let me show you one of these posters. Hosts of Russian state media cheered her nomination, Russians cheering her nomination as the Director of National Intelligence, because it will, quote, dismantle America. Some on Russian state channels have even referred to her affectionately as their girlfriend. Russian state TV also called her a Russian comrade in Trump's emerging cabinet. A pro-Putin propagandist, Vladimir Sokolov, once called Gabbard our friend. Later, when asked if she was, quote, some sort of Russian agent, he replied, of course, yes. What's going on here? This woman wants to head up the intelligence agencies, and she's being cheered on by Russians. And in a glowing profile in a Russian state newspaper, it said of Tulsi Gabbard, and I quote, The CIA and FBI are trembling, noting that Ukrainians consider her, quote, an agent of the Russian state. Imagine that. The person tapped to head America's intelligence community being called a puppet of an adversary country by that very same country. It seems too ridiculous to be true, but I'm sorry to say it is. To merely join America's intelligence community, never mind lead it, candidates have to go through a vigorous background check and earn security clearance. I'll just tell you, based on what she has done since serving in Congress, she could not pass a routine security clearance. If Tulsi Gabbard was applying for the entry-level position, her relationship with Russia alone would disqualify her from the job. Why then would we trust our entire intelligence network to the number one friend of our number one enemy? Why then would we want to put that sort of person in charge? Given the examples that abound of Tulsi Gabbard proving publicly, shamelessly, and carelessly her sympathy for nations that undermine U.S. interests and security, that is inexplainable and irresponsible. Perhaps this was summed up best by one of her people who worked with her for years. Here's what he had to say, quoted in Atlantic magazine, quote, "She was willing to do or say whatever. It was like she had absolutely no moral compass." And to head up all of our intelligence agencies? It's as controversial as choosing Kash Patel to head up our Federal Bureau of Investigation. No experience which qualifies him, nor does she have any experience either. You see, our allies depend on us as much as we depend on security and to share critical intelligence. Now they're looking at us in disbelief that we would let someone like Tulsi Gabbard, with such an appalling record, anywhere near the leadership of the intelligence community. Intelligence professionals from Canada and the United Kingdom, members of the critical Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, along with the US, Australia, and New Zealand, have expressed concern about even working with her if she's in charge. In order to keep Americans safe throughout the world, we need to have the trust of our allies and their cooperation. This position she's aspiring to of DNI does not just impact the collection of intelligence, it also impacts the action taken on it. Because of this, I have great concern about the impact Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation would have on our support in Ukraine defending against Russia. Since Russia's full-scale invasion, Gabbard has taken Russia's side many times, claiming, quote, in reference to Ukraine and Russia, Russia had legitimate security concerns, the words of Tulsi Gabbard. And then she blames NATO, our alliance,